Do you like to read reviews before you decide to buy a cookbook? And if so, where do you find reviews you can trust? Welcome to Everything Cookbooks, the podcast for writers, readers, and cooks. I'm Molly Stevens, and today I am here with the whole Everything Cookbooks team. I've got Kate Leahy, Kristin Donnelly, and Andrea Nguyen. Hey, everybody.
Hey.
Hello,
Hey, Molly.
So, we are all here because Tim Mazurek wrote a recent blog post where he claimed that the lack of rigorous cookbook criticism means that we don't take cookbooks seriously in this country. He went so far as to say, and I'm going to quote here, "Most cookbooks are not very good, and very few people actually read them or cook from them, especially industry experts." Well, needless to say, there was a pretty robust online. The interwebs went a little buzzy with this. Paula Forbes wrote a really smart response. So did Leslie Brenner. There's even, I found a Reddit subthread on this. And the four of us got on email and the opinions were flying. So we thought, let's push record and have a chat about it. So it's a big topic. Maybe we start by saying, what is cookbook criticism?
You know, I thought about this, and one of the things is, I mean, you know, look, I get the Sunday New York Times, and, you know, there's a book review section. Mm-hmm. And they have all kinds of books that they review, you know, from children's literature to, you know, nonfiction and fiction works. But, you know, there are never like cookbooks in that book section. So when Tim brought this up and I read it, and I was like, maybe he has a point. But maybe that point could be better expressed. I don't know. Has he written a cookbook? I mean, what is criticism, and how does it differ from other nonfiction literary criticism? What about restaurant criticism? And should we even call it criticism? Because that sounds so mean.
Right.
Well, yeah, it does sound mean, but I guess it's like, are cookbooks taken seriously enough to be examined in the same way a novel is examined or a piece of children's literature? And should they be? I have mixed feelings. I'm going to say that.
I mean, have any of you ever written cookbook reviews for anyone?
No.
I've reviewed them for my own, you know, newsletter and blog posts. I've done roundups and stuff. But I feel like because I write cookbooks that I'm not, it's like a restaurateur.
Sure.
Right. Writing restaurant reviews. And I mean, you know, there have been, like with the San Francisco Chronicle, some issues with that. Mm-hmm. But, you know, that's a different discussion. So I think that there's a conflict of interest in someone who writes cookbooks to review them. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I guess I could see that. Like, if, let's say if you wrote a not very nice review, it could be like, does she have sour grapes? Or, you know, it's like some beef with the author. I guess that can happen. I mean, just even like, because a lot of times it is like novelists who are writing other book reviews for fiction.
Right. Like, yeah, line them up in the New York Times and the Wall Street Journal and, you know, USA Today, whatever.
There are roundups, though, right?
Yeah.
So I feel like I think what Tim is complaining about is the lack of a rigorous critique, whereas we do see a lot of roundups, and all the big newspapers do them, the magazines do them. Kate, I think you have done them before for a magazine where you just, these are the books that are coming out.
Right, and you kind of go through, for example, I have done roundups for Plate magazine, which is a business-to-business publication, and it's talking to chefs. So when I do those roundups, I'm looking for titles that I think will appeal to professional cooks, chefs, restaurateurs. So I'm looking at it for a different lens than I would for home cooks. It actually helps me filter a lot of books that come out that are very home cook driven. But that means that if there is a home cookbook in there, it has to have some sort of lesson or things that I think will be of interest to somebody who professionally cooks for a living. And I think that's one thing that's interesting about what Tim says in his review. Industry experts don't use cookbooks. And I'm wondering what he meant by industry expert, because is he talking about someone who is a professional cook, chef, you know, somebody who has restaurants? Is it a recipe developer for brands? Or is it people like us who write cookbooks and are in that food media space? I'm not sure what he means by industry expert.
Yeah.
I mean, I definitely feel like there ends up being an echo chamber around cookbooks. Like we just start hearing about, I feel like we might have spoke with Matt Sartwell about this a little bit, but you just start seeing the same things. Whereas in the roundups, books rise to the top, they get attention for various reasons. And then the blurbs, the little paragraphs that are written about them, it's all the same. And they're often taken off the book jacket. So
yeah, I'm trying to remember. I used to write a monthly, like a book report sort of thing for Food and Wine online, but it was very much in celebration of a book. And I did test recipes from them, but I often only focused on the books I liked. But I do remember my own book, Modern Potluck, Paula Forbes reviewed it for Epicurious back when she was doing reviews. She either cooked the recipes herself, or because it was a potluck book, she actually like distributed recipes and had other people cook them and had a potluck, which was super cool. But it was a real review.
yeah.
Right.
She shared positive, and then she like had some slight. I remember especially about serving size, like the serving size feeling like it was all over the place, which I actually was like kind of valid because it's a potluck and,
Right.
you know, how many dishes are there? And yeah.
No, I think you touch on two really important points in that when I was at Fine Cooking, I would do roundups as well, or review. They were more like reviews, but you would only include books that you liked. Like you wouldn't include a book that, so just by being included, that was an endorsement. And then it was a review, and I might have cooked a few things from them, but it was more reading it, imagining cooking it, which is, I think, why cookbook authors are reviewing, why they're asked to do it, because assumption is that you can read a recipe and know if it works.
Right.
Oh,
Exactly.
to a point, I think.
Yeah, I'm not saying it's correct, but I think that's sort of a way to...
Right.
Well, and some, like the New York Times in 2023 had their cookbook roundup at the end of the year, and they had their staff cook from the books and review them, you know, in like these short pieces. And I was fortunate to be included. Paula has, you know, reviewed my books in the past too, and I mentioned this when we interviewed Paula Forbes on Everything Cookbooks. It was such a joy to read her reviews. I look forward to them so much because they really went in depth. And I remember when she reviewed Vietnamese Food Any Day, she said she really liked it, and she said, but I wish there were more salad recipes. And you know, and I think that if you're writing a cookbook review, you get good things to say, and then you get like not so great things to say. Right. And that's where like the constructive criticism comes into that review. And as the author, you learn from it. So then in my next book, I was like, for Paula Forbes, I'm going to include a big salad section. In fact, an entire chapter of modern Vietnamese salads, because, you know, she was right. Just like what you said, Kristin. It's like, yeah, you know, I admit that there were shortcomings. So I think that we can take it is what we're saying. It's like, you know, you can dish it and we can take it.
I mean, we can take it because I feel like it was largely a good review and I stood by my work. But then I don't even know. Like, so Ray Isle, wine rater, his book in the New York Times got so panned, it almost felt personal. I was almost like...
It was called hernia inducing. You don't say that in a fair review.
I was like, what does this reviewer have against Ray? Oh my gosh. Like, So if that was my book, I might have to like punch some pillows for a little while.
Right. But even getting a review is a sign of attention, of acknowledgement that it's a book worthy of review.
True.
And that particular review was actually incredibly beautiful to read, I have to say. I'm sorry. It was so like such a...
Okay. Yeah, it was good writing.
We'll have a link in the show notes.
Because it was written by...
Dwight Garner.
Yes, I think it was Dwight Gardner.
Well, so that's interesting you bring up Dwight and the New York Times book review, because don't they still twice a year do an issue that's just dedicated to what, like children's books are in there, gardening books were in there, like non-literary books? I don't know. And this brings the question is, are cookbooks, because they're domestic, are they not taken seriously? Are they, oh, it's just a cookbook?
I really wonder if it's like... You can read an entire book and I guess get it, but like a cookbook, you have to do it. You have to cook it. And yes, like you could cook a few recipes and see that, I guess, but maybe to do it justice, you need to cook more of them.
It's the economics of it, though. I mean, when I do a cookbook roundup, when I've done them in the past for Plate Magazine, I mean, I'm getting paid, you know, not that much to review how many books come out per season. And I'm not getting paid enough to actually cook from these books. I'm basically going through them, making until my eyes bleed, trying to pull out, okay, would this fit the parameters of this roundup? And I'm not saying that's the best thing, the best way to do it. It's just as a freelancer, that's all I can afford to do.
Paula talks a lot about this in her response.
Yeah.
Right.
The time, the money to properly review a book is prohibitive.
I mean, I've been waiting for someone, and I guess dear publishers or dear somebody out there could fund us to do this. I mean, you could do a group review where you split it up, and have it be fun, and even ask the authors to weigh in on what worked and what didn't work. I mean, I don't know. I just feel like cookbooks are held to a different standard. And there's a book that was done by a TikTok person, and it sold very well. But people have told me in very hush-hush tones, oh, well, those recipes didn't work, and the author kind of knew it. But then the author's followers say, well, we're just going to buy the book anyway because we just love the author on social media. And I'm just like, shoot.
Yeah.
I just, cookbooks make a lot of money. So the thing is that if someone says that they're not taken seriously, well, financially they are. Okay. They sell, they make money for people, they start careers. So they should be taken seriously. And we need to find a way to talk about cookbooks and make them better.
Mm-hmm. Well, and that's part of this whole conversation, is that it's a disservice to the good cookbooks that there isn't some standard that cookbooks are held to. That if they're just allowed, what are we, cookbook police out there saying this is not a good book?
Do you think it's because cookbooks in the broader public sense, we're lumping cookbooks all in as this one huge category? But when you're talking about, say, fiction, you have all these genres. And so I don't think a romance novel is reviewed in the same way a literary novel is. So they have different kind of parameters. You would be reviewing those. With a romance, like, is it satisfying that the couple gets together at the end? If the couple doesn't get together in the end, it's not a romance, and romance readers are going to be like, this is a terrible book. With cookbooks, like, you hope the recipes work. That should be parameter number one. We know that's not always the case, but also you're going to have different expectations for a book that does a deep dive versus a book that's trying to solve a very specific question that's maybe not as personal. Say something that's for a specialty diet might be an excellent book, but maybe it doesn't have that sexy appeal that rises to the top of social media, but it could be an excellent book. So maybe that's the problem. We don't have like cookbook genres to even like put books in their bucket so they can be kind of reviewed among their peers.
Right. We don't.
Yeah.
I guess that's where awards will separate that out. But I was thinking that because it's like cookbooks serve so many different purposes, right? Some are really like travel logs and to like bring people to a totally new place. Some are to introduce potentially a new culture. Some are workhorse books to just like help people get dinner on the table or meal prep. And then do those get reviewed against each other and or reviewed by the same reviewers? And like, what if the writing is really beautiful in one, but then the recipes aren't that great, or
right. And then the corporate books, a book that has, say, the backing of America's Test Kitchen.
Or Ottolenghi.
Right, or Ottolenghi. And it's fronted by one or two people, but that book is pitted up against a book that's written by a solo author or perhaps a collaboration. I mean, those are just like apples and oranges, it's like a pomelo versus a lime. I mean, in terms of sizes.
Right. I mean, I've seen that America's Test Kitchen. I mean, Andrea, you go through, they have a whole dishwashing station. You don't even have to do your dishes, and you don't even have to like get your ingredients to do the test because somebody puts them on a tray for you and slides it over. Those are so time intensive for testing when you're doing it all yourself.
Right. Because you're part of a franchise versus a solo operator.
I keep thinking about the conversation, Andrea, you and I had with Charlotte Druckmann many, many episodes ago. We were talking about awards, which you just mentioned, but criticism and awards are certainly related. And can they be objective at all? Because a book that really speaks to me that I love is probably not the same book that my niece, who's just starting her family and needs to get dinner on the table in 5 minutes or less, is going to work for her.
Yeah. I mean, Charlotte's perspective was no. Right. I mean, it was like, you cannot be objective. It is subjective.
But then, I mean, like when she talked about the piglet, and there's like so much, people bring up the piglet all the time. And I think it was Tim who pointed out, like, the Piglet had like these celebrity people who kind of knew books and kind of didn't, and they were kind of snarky, and it was about like their personality. And so there was a kind of clubby quality about it instead of a rubric or more rigorous, a professional approach to reviewing books. But that was also, I think, kind of the point of the Piglet, was not to take it too seriously.
For those who don't remember the Piglet or weren't into cookbooks when the Piglet was going on, you can go back and listen to the Charlotte Druckmann episode that goes into where it came from and how it lived on Food 52. It's a great episode.
So, I mean, what defines a good cookbook? This blog post says that the cookbooks aren't very good. There aren't very many good cookbooks. And I think that's subjective as well. Obviously, that's subjective. But what's a good cookbook depends on what you're looking for, isn't it? I mean, we can agree on what's a bad cookbook, maybe. That's easier.
I kind of understand where Tim is coming from, and a little backstory in him. I know he's somebody who is just very passionate about cookbooks and food, and he's had this long-running blog. He's based in the Chicago area. And I do remember when Mindy Siegel's Cookie Love cookbook came out. He wrote a review on his site, Lottie and Doof, and it was a great review. I mean, he really loves Mindy's cookies. He loved the book, but he did have a critique on the photography, saying that it seemed a little dated for the style of book this was. It seemed a little too country kitchen, maybe. Those aren't his words, but it did stick with me. And I thought, I'm not sure if he's right, because Mindy was very happy with the photography. That was above my pay grade at the time. I was not involved in those decisions. But it sounds like a terrible disclaimer. I mean, whatever. But
no, but it was, because the chef makes the choice, man.
Right. And I thought, I'm like, I think I know what he meant. Like, he just thought like this book was cool enough to just have a little bit more of an edge to it in the way it looked. And I thought that was a really interesting and smart thing to say. It's his opinion, but I appreciated that he was putting it out there. And so I think what he means is, and I have seen this, and I don't know if this is a hot take. I would love your all opinions on it. But, when I was looking at new cookbooks that were coming out, and there's, of course, a lot of them, I think there's a lot of storytelling that's not very good. There's a lot of backstory and not enough maybe front story is kind of what I'm talking about. And I don't think this is on the author's side. I think this is just a thing where editors are overworked and there's just not enough editing to really make people trim. And there's no line editing in a lot of these books. And I think that's just a missed opportunity. And I don't think that's necessarily on the authors, especially when you're a first-time author. You wouldn't know all that.
I'll actually say that a lot of times when I'm looking at a book, the things that jump out to me are things where it feels like, a little more care in the editing would have helped tone this. Like, I've seen like repetition of anecdotes, like kind of close together.
Wow.
It's like sameness of headnotes, maybe.
I agree, Kristin.
Which actually, sometimes sameness of headnotes is fine because, people dip into books in different ways. They're not always reading it one page after another. But I don't know. There have been times where I'm like, just a little more time with the edit.
Well, but don't you think that this is a reflection of capturing the debut author's popularity and momentum at the moment as quickly as you can on social media and elsewhere, because you don't know how those darn algorithms will move and whatnot, and then the editors are overworked, and then there's just like this outpouring of word count on the keyboard, and I don't know, sometimes it seems like things are dictated, or maybe the person types really fast, but I just don't know how those books manuscripts are done in like a year or 6 months.
Sometimes there is that, it's like because the book is rushed. I've seen books where even like the book itself wasn't rushed, but just could have been slightly better edited. But I think overworked is very true. I do have a lot of sympathy for people who are working in publishing. I do think, it's a theme that's coming up this season.
Yes. At the beginning, Andrea, you were saying how cookbooks make money. They make money for the publishers mostly, and for some of the, hot stars. And we're talking also in general about how the lack of cookbook criticism, rigorous cookbook criticism, perhaps, is contributing to less quality of cookbooks. So if there were some rigorous cookbook criticism introduced, is that going to improve cookbooks or not? Because they're still going to make money with or without it.
Right. I don't know if criticism moves the needle on sales.
Where do I go if I want to find out if a book is worth my, $39 or whatever it is?
Look if you had Dwight Garner, sorry, Dwight, I don't know you, but I wish I could write like you, to check out cookbooks and write in a way that was so wonderful to read, whether it's positive or negative or in between. It's a joy.
Absolutely.
And I feel like if we keep rushing books and putting them out and having them pop up like mushrooms, is what a cookbook shop owner said to me.
It's had a whack-a-mole image in my
head. Yeah. I mean, it's like it's so overwhelming. But we all want to slow down, right? We want to slow down the train.
Are there too many books? Is that the problem? Are there more books now? I don't know. I don't know if there's more cookbooks that have been released now than there were 5 years ago or 10 years ago. I have no idea.
I think more people are into cookbooks, maybe. I don't know. We'd have to, really check in with publishers. I think that maybe there are more publishers publishing cookbooks nowadays than in the past. But it seems from like Ken Concepcion from Now Serving LA, he said to me, there are just so many of them.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm. Or maybe there are more of them that appeal to him and his wife, Michelle, at the shop in LA. I don't know, but there are more people making cookbooks, and a lot of them are very interesting, and a lot of them are kind of like, wow, do we really need that?
Mm-hmm.
But it's a sales opportunity for a publisher, and that's what I say to myself. So going back to Molly, your comment on what do we look for in a good cookbook, for me personally, I'm looking for a book that's going to teach me something I don't know.
Mm-hmm.
That could come from anybody, any place.
I really am just looking for like new dinner inspiration. Mm-hmm. Like even if I know the things, sometimes like a book that has those easy recipes, but just a different personality, different from what I've seen, the cookbook Modern Proper. I don't know that cookbook teaches me anything, but it's just appealing recipes. For me, that sometimes still is valuable.
Hey, it's Andrea and Gwen. Are you enjoying this episode of Everything Cookbooks? I sure hope you are. But to be honest, it takes money to make every single show, and we need your help to keep the lights on. To pitch in, head on over to everythingcookbooks.com/support. There you'll see a range of options. If there's an insider event scheduled, sign on up to learn more about the cookbook publishing world. Order books through our affiliate page. We've got merch too. T-shirts, sweatshirts, and writing caps. Or just buy us a round of coffee. You can also leave us a review. Help us out however you can. Molly, Kristin, Kate, and I value every single bit of support. Thanks so much for your kindness.
Kate, what do you look for in a book?
Voice is important because it sets a tone for the book, and it sets like how serious you're going to take it. And I'm not saying you have to take all the books seriously, but it just kind of sets your expectations. I think at the beginning of a book has to teach you how to read it. That introduction, I think, is really crucial to grab you and say, okay, I'm going to teach you how to cook from this book. This is the type of book it is. This is how you're going to use it. Whether they spell it out in those specific words, you can be more creative. It can be more about the personal story. But I do think it's important for a book to kind of set its expectations of like how they imagine this book is going to be used. And I don't think that's any different from any book. I think all books, if it's a self-help book, you're going to have a book that is going to teach you how to use it at the very beginning. If it's a novel, it's going to teach you how to read it. Is it a historical fiction? You're going back in time. Is it, again, a romance novel and you're waiting for the meet cute? The beginning of the book's going to teach you about how to read it. I don't know if that sounds a little woo-woo or a little out there, but I think...
No, that's called like setting the stage and the framework. That's like the ground rule. You're setting the ground rules.
The promise of the book?
The promise of the premise.
I want to know what the book's promising and does it deliver on that? And that goes back to every, who's the audience? Like if it's a book about getting the, inspiration for everyday cooking, that's what I'm looking for in it. If it's a book that does a deep dive on using your sous vide machine or something, I'm probably not going to buy it. But you want to know what it's trying to do. But so I guess where do we find this information? I mean, are we standing in bookstores browsing?
I mean, people read Amazon reviews, I think, which is, that's not always the best place. Sometimes I feel like with Amazon reviews, you just have to think is this person like me?
Mm-hmm.
The person that's mad that there are too many vegetable
not enough
recipes
photographs
in this book.
It's always not enough photographs.
Yeah.
but like, are they like me? I want to bring up something a little, like maybe that's a little obvious, but it's like, is there not a lot of cookbook reviewing, especially among, like cookbook authors doing it for other authors because we're afraid to be mean?
Yeah.
And I would say yes, for me personally.
I would say yes, because cookbooks are nice things.
And there's a shit ton of work to make.
A shit ton. Right. That's like our word for 2024, shit ton.
I understand when the errors pop in. And so I think I'm a little more generous, but an error that's slipped through copy editing or proofreading is different than an anecdote that's repeated or sloppily presented, or a bunch of recipes that don't really gel in any way. I mean, there are certain things I'm more lenient about, and then others I'm like, oh, this book is garbage.
Mm-hmm. Yoda Matalengi's books, love them. If I cook from Plenty exactly as written, I often find the recipe doesn't come out as well as if I like riff a little bit. I know that they were converted to US measurements. I don't know how skillfully that was done. So sometimes I think about that too. Like, can you love a book because it is providing all this inspiration, but maybe the recipes aren't airtight?
Yeah. I would say you can if it's cooking, but not baking. I think baking books where things are off are really, really hard to hold on to because you have to do too much fiddling with it to actually get it to work. And then you feel like you're actually doing recipe development for the author at that point.
Well, it depends on what kind of cook you are, too. We all know cooks who buy the book. That's how they follow the recipe. They don't make any changes.
But Kristin brings up something very interesting. It's the packaging of the book, right? It's the style, the voice, the vibes.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Cookbook vibes.
And that book had great vibes.
Yeah. All of Yotam's books, because he's a style person. He thinks about the look as much as the flavor and the precision. And so does his staff. And that's part of their brand.
To be honest, since Plenty, I haven't cooked as directly from his other books. And I know that there's he does have a staff. And I'm mostly just saying my personal experience with that book was if I adjust this a little bit, it comes out.
Or cut out 5 ingredients because the recipe lists are pretty long.
Yeah, right.
Sorry, but it's true.
Yeah. It's like he got people to make things, to cook things, And so, but it is that echo chamber, Molly, that you brought up.
Well, I think there's so many ways that we use cookbooks. Like I'm in a library full of cookbooks, and many, many, many of them never make it into my kitchen. And I still love them and read them and have, they're part of how I think about food. And then there are people who read cookbooks in bed. We've talked about them. And then there are people who buy the book, cook their way through books. So that's another challenge with reviewing them is how are you using this book? Is it just bringing you joy to flip through it?
Can we talk about what would be the ideal review? For me, an ideal review is somebody who really spends time with the book, tests at least 3 recipes, gives pros and cons, probably highlights, unless it's a really big book that is selling a lot, you don't pick on the little guys. You pick, if you're going to do a bad review, I guess is what I mean.
That makes sense.
I don't know. That's what I would kind of see. Kind of like what Paula Forbes was doing at Epicurious when she was reviewing cookbooks.
Mm-hmm.
How long would that take? 2 weeks?
Yeah.
Okay, so that's 2 weeks of labor. So you're reading the book. That's going to take a couple of days. You're going to pick some recipes. Let's say you test 3 recipes. You have to go get the ingredients. You got to cook them. You got to write up your thoughts. And you got to edit. Blah blah blah.
Submit your receipts. Yeah, I got to
submit your receipts. Okay, so now you do the numbers, dear listeners.
And who's going to hire you to do that?
Right.
Yeah.
And what if it's one of these big books of the year, much anticipated? I'm not going to mention any names. And it doesn't live up to the promise.
Yeah.
And then people are hating you mean? On social media?
Because people are very defensive about their cooks, right?
I know, on Instagram, Kitchen Bookshelf, I feel like there are some people who they don't do thorough reviews, but they will spend that time with the book. They cook a lot of the recipes. They share their own opinions. But Kitchen Bookshelf is one of them. It's sort of a review,
yeah.
but she did admit to me that she's afraid to go negative.
Yeah.
Like she doesn't, like she's like, every once in a while you might be able to read between the lines and see like where I struggled with a recipe, but she doesn't want to pan a book. She wants to celebrate a book.
Yeah.
And look, I mean, if you're a first-time author, you're doing everything you can. You got your book deal. The book comes out, and you get these mentions, and you get your friends and other influencers, friends to support the book launch. I'm all for that. Okay? Shoot, you got to hustle. Cookbooks, they're a different animal than a novel or, other works of nonfiction. But shoot, I think novelists and people who write other nonfiction also hustle too. So, and we just have a different hustle.
Yep.
Yeah. Well, what do you think about Goodreads? Because I never look at Goodreads. I know it's much more important probably for fiction and narrative nonfiction, but I know Goodreads on the fiction side, people can get pretty spicy with their reviews. And it's like, if you didn't do something, maybe you named a character a name that somebody hated, I mean, they take you down. And they are not worried about hurting feelings, even if it is a favorite author. They even say, I loved all these authors' books except for this one because of the ballet scene or something like that.
Too many pirouettes.
Yeah, I have not looked at Goodreads for cookbooks. There was on this subreddit thread I saw, a librarian was talking about Library Journal and Choice as two places that she finds reviews. She was defending and saying there are reviews to go look for. She's Publishers Weekly, of course. And she was saying that even the New York Times review of books still includes enough cookbooks. I mean, those are places that she goes. I remember Chowhound used to have a very robust community where they're not any around, but cookbook clubs is kind of, I think, what you were talking about a little bit, Kristin. It's sort of along that line. Yeah.
In addition to, I guess I was thinking like there are these like some independent just cookbook lovers out there who will take the time, in a sort of sense, review a book. And cookbook clubs, I'm sure that they do that as well.
Yeah.
But it's also, I guess it's like in the end, like what's the point of a review? It's like a circular conversation, but like, is it to help guide a consumer choice? Is it to talk about where like a book fits into like a cultural narrative or point in time? And what, is it like, are we criticizing its bigger message?
Right. I mean, is it holding the whole industry to task? I don't know that it...
I think you can do all of that.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I guess in the end, it's like, what does the book promise? How does it live up?
How well was it executed? What does it contribute? Maybe it contributes beauty. Maybe it contributes new, ideas from a culture we don't know enough about. Maybe it's got great vibes. I mean, you can point all of that out because, somebody agreed to publish the cookbook. Someone wrote it. A bunch of people worked on it. And there's a reason why it exists, or many reasons. So I don't think that they have to be like a total takedown, I mean, there's a lot of positives, but they take time to write. I think that you would have to be paid for it. There has to be some kind of monetary incentive to spend 2 weeks of your life on one book.
Absolutely.
So if that was your full-time job, you wouldn't be able to review that many.
And is there demand for that? Are there people enough who want to read that, and where?
I feel like it's got to be like $3,000 a review or something.
Well, usually what happened, like what Bonnie Benwick talked about when she did the Magnolia Table review, when Molly and I talked to her last year, it sounded to me that she reviewed the book, but she also, used maybe the Washington Post staff to test certain recipes out. So it's kind of like probably what the New York Times did with its cookbook roundup in end of 2023. You're using people who are already on your salary. You're just adding to their workload. Hopefully, though, by spreading the wealth around, you get more people to test the recipes, and then it would be somebody synthesizing all that information. The hardest part would be to really have that. One of the reasons people read reviews, like people read Ruth Reichel for her voice. People read reviews because they want that sort of sense that I'm in the hands of an expert who knows what they're talking about, and this is what they thought. We don't have that in cookbooks.
Right.
We had Bonnie for that one.
Right.
And she used to do reviews, yeah.
Garner does an amazing job, but it's only a tiny piece of what it does.
Right.
Okay, so what if, what if, like, there was a person who had a website, a Substack newsletter or something, and then authors and or their publishers would freely subject themselves to a review sent like 4 copies of the book. And then that person then farmed them out to 3 other people to test them. And then they come back with their opinions. And then it all becomes like one piece of a review that comes out that's fair in the review, that is edited. And then it's out there for the public to read. You know, would that work? Would the public be interested in that? Would people want to read that? The good, the bad, the ugly, the so-so, the fair to middling?
I would.
And I would even offer that the author and the publisher would have an opportunity to respond so that there's a dialogue. That's interesting.
Are you saying that the publisher would pay for this review to be written, almost like a freelance assignment?
Yeah, partially pay.
Like they would influencers, or I don't know if they do that. But, you know, it's like, there's a whole racket going on with the social media influencer space. And maybe that should come over to like the Substack cookbook review space that we're going to invent right now.
Yeah, we're going to invent them right now, folks, dear publishers.
I mean, I think cookbooks are taken seriously. I do object to saying that cookbooks aren't taken seriously, because I think they are, but they're not. The subject matter, I don't know. I'm confused by this whole, not where I stand on it, but if there's a place for cookbook criticism, and who's going to pay for it? Who's going to support it?
Well, somebody could create a Substack that's self-funded.
Right.
Not self-funded, but if people want it.
Right.
They'll pay. They'll subscribe.
Andrea's model. Yeah.
Yeah.
There's the idea.
Hello, Everything Cookbooks on Substack. Funded by listeners willing.
Everything Cookbooks reviews.
I don't want that on my plate.
I don't want to do it.
Personally.
I love cookbooks, but I don't want to be a cookbook reviewer.
Right.
Yeah.
So somebody out there.
It is how I got one of my first big gigs, is that I wrote a review of a preserving book, and Maria Guarnaschelli at the time read it and called me up and said, "Do you make jams and jellies?" Because I wrote it from a place of expertise. So
there you go, Molly.
there you go. Full circle.
There you go.
That's amazing.
It would be a very interesting to have exist, but it probably won't happen because there's money involved and feelings could be hurt. But I don't know, I mean, we're adults here.
Yeah, I mean, you're publishing, you're putting it out in the public. It's open for criticism.
I'm criticizing myself all the time.
Probably more harshly than other people do.
I'm just like, why the hell did you do that? Are you sure?
Absolutely. I would learn from reading cookbook criticism.
Yeah, agree.
When they're well written, and the reviews that I have read, I learn. Whether, reading about my own books or other people's.
Yeah, learn to make it better.
Yeah. Interesting has come up, and I think it's created a lot of dialogue, and I really thank you for weighing in on it. And I think this might be the first of many conversations on this topic. It'd be interesting to see where this ruckus goes.
I'd love to hear what people think about it.
For sure.
Maybe we have a cookbook reviewer listening to us right now who says, "Hey, check out my reviews," and send them our way.
Anyway, so listeners, if you have any thoughts, please let us know. As always, you can find us at our website, everythingcookbooks.com. Well, thanks, everybody.
Thanks, Molly.
Thanks, Molly.
Thanks for taking the lead.
Thank you for listening to Everything Cookbooks. For more episodes and ways to contact us, go to our website, everythingcookbooks.com. The show is available wherever you get your audio, and if you like what you hear, please do leave us a review. It helps other people find the show. Any book mentioned can be found on our affiliate page at bookshop.org. Thank you, as always, to our editor, Abby Circatella. And until next time, keep on writing, reading, and cooking.